Before we begin, this story matters because it exposes a gap between what modern survival culture promises and what history actually proved under pressure. During World War II, tens of thousands of soldiers faced winter temperatures hovering around 0 degrees Fahrenheit with no modern tents, no insulated sleeping bags, and honestly, often no guarantee of shelter at all. This wasn't a test, it was daily reality. And the methods they used weren't improvised gimmicks, they were standardized practices refined through brutal trial, formal doctrine, and loss. During the winter campaigns in Eastern Europe, the Ardennes, and the Korean border regions at the tail end of the war, exposure killed nearly as effectively as enemy fire. Frostbite, hypothermia, and exhaustion crippled units before combat even began. The armies that adapted fastest weren't the ones with the best gear. They were the ones that understood heat as a resource that had to be controlled, recycled, and defended. The popular image of soldiers carrying full camping kits collapses quickly under historical scrutiny. Rapid advances, retreats, and artillery pressure meant tents were frequently abandoned or destroyed. Sleeping bags were rare, bulky, and often soaked beyond usefulness. In forested or contested terrain, setting up visible shelter was an invitation for artillery or air attack. Soldiers learned quickly that concealment mattered more than comfort. Instead of portable shelter, World War II doctrine emphasized micro-positioning. Men were taught to select ground that naturally blocked wind, such as reverse slopes, tree lines, or shell craters that didn't collect water. Even a shallow depression reduced wind exposure enough to preserve body heat. This wasn't instinct, it was trained behavior, drilled repeatedly in winter manuals issued by multiple armies. Direct contact with frozen ground was honestly one of the fastest ways to lose body heat. Without sleeping pads, soldiers had to use anything that created some separation. Pine boughs were, really, the gold standard. Even a thick layer compressed under body weight still trapped air and acted as crude insulation. Where vegetation just wasn't available, men would use spare clothing, rope coils, sandbags, or even emptied packs beneath their torsos. The principle was simple and actually still applies today. Heat loss downward is just relentless. Any material that traps air, even if it's imperfect, slows that loss. We soldiers didn't need laboratory explanations. They measured success by whether they woke up functional. Sleeping alone in extreme cold was inefficient and, quite frankly, often fatal. Soldiers routinely slept in pairs or small groups, arranged back-to-back or side-to-side, minimizing exposed surface area. This wasn't about morale, it was physics. Shared body heat reduced metabolic strain and helped preserve core temperature. In some units, especially on the Eastern Front, rotations were established where one man stayed semi-awake while others slept, ensuring circulation and preventing lethal stillness. This practice reduced frostbite dramatically, particularly in feet and hands. Modern survivalists can apply this principle legally and safely by understanding that immobility is dangerous in extreme cold. Even minor movement preserves circulation. World War II manuals stress this relentlessly. One of the most counterintuitive lessons World War II soldiers learned was that sweating killed. Overdressing during movement soaked clothing, which then froze during rest. Soldiers were trained to underdress while marching, and overdress only when stationary. Damp garments were exchanged or dried whenever possible, sometimes inside clothing using body heat alone. Foot care was, well, obsessive. Socks were rotated constantly, and feet were dried aggressively, even in freezing conditions. Frostbite wasn't treated as bad luck. It was treated as a failure of discipline. This lesson translates directly to today. In cold weather camping or emergencies, moisture management actually matters more than insulation thickness. Open fires were honestly dangerous at the front. Smoke revealed positions, and light attracted fire. Instead of large fires, soldiers used minimal heat sources, often shielded or buried. Heated rocks wrapped in cloth were placed near the core or feet. In some cases, weapons barrels warmed by firing were used briefly as radiant heat sources before cooling. The goal was never comfort, it was survival through the night without detection. Cold erodes judgment. World War II accounts repeatedly describe soldiers giving up simple tasks because fatigue made them feel impossible. Those who survived the longest were often those who followed routines mechanically, even when exhausted. Boots loosened, toes flexed, clothing adjusted, positions checked. This is the least discussed survival factor today, but history shows it mattered enormously. Discipline preserved life when motivation failed. So the lesson here isn't to just reject modern gear, not at all. It's, well, to understand that gear can fail. World War II soldiers survived because they understood principles, not just products. Wind control, ground insulation, moisture management, shared heat, and routine. These weren't optional, they were, in fact, the system. If modern equipment disappears, these principles still function. That's exactly why they're worth learning. World War II didn't reward comfort. It rewarded those who adapted faster than the cold. And, honestly, at 0 degrees, adaptation was the difference between waking up and, well, never waking at all. If this kind of history matters to you, if you want the truth behind survival rather than all those marketing myths, just subscribe to the channel and share this with someone who thinks technology replaced experience. History didn't have backups. It had lessons,